Soos genoem gesels ek met Dr. Tara Southey en sy is 'n wingerdboukundige aan die Universiteit van Stellenbosch. Dokter, welkom by Groot Plaas.
Baie dankie, is lekker om hier te wees.
Ja, dis lekker om oor hierdie lekker tema te gesels. So natuurlik is klimaatsverandering is 'n realiteit in die tye waarin ons lewe. So om te begin mee, volgens u, wat is die grootste bedreigings as dit kom by die sukses van 'n wingerd op die oomblik? En dis nou 'n wingerd in Suid-Afrika.
So my ondervinding is dit regtig, jy moet weet wat in jou omgewing aangaan om te weet hoe om beter te reageer in die seisoen. En wat ons sien met klimaatsverandering is nie, en ons is een produsent wat nie sal saamstem dat klimaatsverandering iets is waantoe ons beweeg en wat ons eintlik elke seisoen voel. En baie van die bedrywe sê nie een seisoen is dieselfde nie. Wynbedryf het nou onlangs weer gesê hierdie seisoen was een van die seisoene wat uitstaan van ander seisoene. So ons sit in 'n situasie waar nie een seisoen dieselfde is nie. So my antwoord is regtig 'n boer moet begin weet wat in hulle omgewing aangaan om beter te reageer en hoe dit verander.
Ek wil ook net hier sê is so welkom in Engels te antwoord. So ek gaan in Afrikaans vra, hoe groot rol speel klimaatsverandering in die verband? Nou ons weet, soos ek nou gesê, dis so 'n realiteit in ons samelewing. Nou as dit spesifiek by wingerde kom, wat se rol speel klimaatsverandering?
So klimaatsverandering in die Weskaap spesifiek wat ons 'n wynbedryf is, elke streek, wynbedryfstreek reageer anders oor klimaatsverandering. Sekere streke raak warmer en maksimum temperature, ander streke raak koeler en minimum temperature. Dit verander die ryp skade in sekere areas teenoor ander. So hoe dit die stok beïnvloed is die waterhou vermoë, hoe die stok kan reageer oor die hittegolwe is nie hoe dit altyd was nie. So ek gaan oorskakel na Engels toe.
Jy is welkom.
It changes the water holding capacity of the soil. It changes the plant's stress capacity as to how it can buffer against its natural environment. So what we're seeing in climate change is the extreme events. So we're seeing more heat waves. And that's where in-field management becomes so important, where there are a lot of concepts at the moment about soil health and how do you get the soil to be in its optimal form and improving our water use. And that results in us actually having to have tools that are available to educate the user or the farmer to plant the right cultivar in the right place. So when these heat waves come and you get these shifts in our chill units accumulations as a result of climate change, the plant is in a better state to buffer against its natural environment. So it's planting the right cultivar, the right crop type in the right place. And we as the wine industry have been driving a flagship project to bring those tools together. And those tools are understanding what your climate is, understanding what your topography and your terrain is, your slope and your aspect, understanding what your soil type is, and then understanding what is your water use within that environment.
So what you're saying is that, so you say that there's every cultivar should be planted in the right conditions. Can you maybe give some examples about that?
When we look at cultivar distributions, a lot of wine farms currently have many cultivars in one specific area. And what we're seeing with climate change is that certain environments are changing to be more optimal for specific cultivars. And the profile in a day, temperature profiling, has a very strong impact on the flavor profile in certain wines. If you take Sauvignon Blanc, for example, Sauvignon Blanc that grows closer to the coast has more of a sea breeze effect. You tend to get more green characteristics and fresh apple and that typicity coming through the wine. Whereas if you move further inland, you start getting more tropical flavors and just the nature of the wine changes. And there's a terroir concept where your soil type and your environment and the amount of sunlight, all of those have factors on what qualities come through in the wine. I have a big philosophy that wine is made in the vineyard, and that is something that we are trying to, through the tools that we've developed and the research that we do in the South African wine industry, is to identify what do you plant where and to bring out that typicity. So some areas are actually more suited to Cabernet Sauvignon, warmer producing areas where you've got cooler producing areas that you should look at cultivars like Sauvignon Blanc. And then you get areas, certain cultivars that have a different chill requirement, something like Chardonnay is suited to certain production areas in the Western Cape. So to drive up our premiumization and our valorization of wine in the wine industry, we need to start planting in the right locations and taking advantage of climate change, which there's a lot to be taken advantage of in the Western Cape, given our sea breeze effect that creates very unique mesoclimatic pockets. So sitting in the position of a blanket statement of climate change is happening, we're getting warmer. Yes, we're getting warmer. Yes, we'll have less rain. Our rain will come at different times. But we have a lot to work with if we know what our environment has to offer us.
Hoe kan 'n wynboer voorberei vir iets soos klimaatsverandering? Are there practical things they can do to try and get ahead of it?
So for me, it comes back to, I think there are methods and there are ways to adapt, changing your row direction, changing your in-vineyard management practices, changing your pruning dates. But at the end of the day, it comes down to understanding how is your environment changing. And that's where we've developed this technology called TerraClim, which is integration of terrain and climate, and was driven by the wine industry into action, where we started asking farmers, what do you need to improve your decision-making in the context of climate change? And that's the study that we started in 2018. And the outcome of that was we need access to climate data, which has been a very difficult thing in the South African wine industry, and we need access to terrain information. And we've used that to create temperature maps so that farmers can now start seeing how is my season changing and how is my season changing over multiple years. And that's where we start getting the indicators of this area is actually getting warmer and this area is actually getting cooler. So if a farmer knows my profile of temperatures is getting, my hours between 35 and 40 in the summer months is getting more, they can start managing their ripening period differently. They can, long-term investment changes would be change your cultivar to be earlier ripening outside of the heat waves that you are starting to see in your area. If your chill is either increasing or decreasing, to get outside of those windows. Something like frost in the area of Robertson is increasing a little bit, and to start seeing where in my specific farm level is the frost happening and when does it happen, and how can I manage to plant something that either has flowering later in the season or earlier in the season to get outside of that risk window. So there are, like I said, in-field management practices, which there are companies and consultants in the wine industry that help with those specific adaptation to climate change strategies. But then there's also long-term strategies, is understanding your environment and planting according to your environment and managing according to your environment and changing a big factor in the agricultural sector is water use. So how do we better use our water? And that is planting a plant in the right place so you manage the stress conditions of that environment. So there's a less water use on that. And then your water use can be distributed throughout your farm, and you can, end up being more profitable as a result of that.
How big of a role does technology play in the wine industry at the moment in South Africa? I presume it's quite big, right?
Absolutely. In some ways, there's too much information, and we've spent a lot of time trying to filter out the large amount of information and to tailor it to what actually is available to aid decision making. And that is where the South African wine industry, WineTech, their research body, has been driving this TerraClim project to integrate terrain and climate, but more than that, to use it as an interface to transfer information to the agricultural sector to aid decision making. And that being, there's a lot of climate models, there's a lot of heat-based models, there's a lot of chill-based models that linked specific to a crop type and specific to a wine cultivar. And they've been driving the initiative of how do we transition all this knowledge that sits in research papers into the decision makers' hands. And we've done that through terraclim.co.za. Alongside this terrain and climate information network, there are a lot of resources such as remote sensing that can give you indications of your plant expression through vegetation index images. So technology is a big driver in the industry, and technology, looking back in time, has become a very powerful resource because it's going to that data science, data-driven decision-making. So if you start monitoring what is your flowering date every year, what is your harvest date every year, and what we saw now in the last season is that our harvest season 2022 was between 10 and 14 days later, and that was attributed to the cooler ripening temperatures. But also you can start comparing as a farmer using these data-driven technologies to say this season was cooler, and then you can start mining the data and start identifying why. Another example was in 2018, our season was 11%, the yield was 11% lower, and we couldn't understand necessarily why, because the reports were certain areas had smaller berries, certain areas had less berries.
Yeah.
And when mining the data backwards to 2018, October, there was a big gap between our maximum and minimum temperatures, and that resulted in the grapevine, which is a calculator, stalling and saying, hey guys, pause. And it's obviously didn't do cell division as optimally as what it would have in a normal situation, and other areas cell division didn't happen. And so cell division and expansion was hampered, and that resulted in the yield at the end of the harvest being lower. So when you can start seeing on these data technology platforms what has happened the last 5 years or 10 years, it can give you as a user a more comfortable environment to make a decision as to what should you do in the future, and not just plant extreme cultivars, but actually how can you manage what you have. And from a climate change perspective, there are these big strategies: plant later cultivars, earlier cultivars, trying to compare what's happening in international forums. But there's a lot that a farmer can work with on ground level. They just have the technology to their advantage. And that's what WineTech has really been pressing as a wine industry to help decision making.
Do you believe there are enough research is done around the wine industry in South Africa?
Absolutely. Our research platform in the South African wine industry is rich. It's world-class. We do profound work on irrigation and plant water use, soil. We really have a good, broad network of expertise when it comes to well-grounded research in South Africa. And this Terraclim tool is actually founded on an extensive amount of research and development. It's not just another tool to use. It's actually all founded on research and taking fundamental research and transitioning that into the decision maker's hands. And that research is more important now than ever, given the extreme situations that we face with no one season being the same. And there is this concept of climate change is happening, and we're going to get between 1 and 2 degrees warmer in X amount of years. But for me, the actual climate status is no season is the same, and we're facing extreme conditions, and we don't know, like there's been floods, there've been droughts, there've been this last season we've had was been extremely cool. When we look at forecasts for what's going to happen in September, October, November, last spring was a wet, cold spring. This spring is predicted to be a dry, warm spring. So we can already from the get-go see that this whole harvest is going to look very, very different to the previous harvest. And that's where having access to this information to help you in your thinking before the season starts, to say, okay, I've got a gear for warmer conditions, drier conditions. It's probably going to pick up fast, and this is what it's going to look like.
Do you believe, I always love ending an interview with, obviously, the industry you are working in now. Are there possibilities, and when we look at the possibilities of careers in the wine industry in South Africa, what possibilities are there? Do you think it's still a blooming industry?
I think the industry is changing significantly, and that's we've gone from you've got an estate, you've got a viticulturist, you've got a winemaker, and that's how it works. I love the wine industry at the moment. I love the agricultural sector at the moment because it's shifting away from this farm. It's shifting to where are the best, you're buying the best Sauvignon Blancs and you're making like amazing wines. So you're starting to play with the whole of the Western Cape in your decision making. You're taking advantage of the climatic dynamics of the Western Cape, and the sky is the limit in the wine industry at the moment from job opportunities. There's new strategies for how you can market your wine. There are new strategies how you can identify what to plant where. I'm a researcher, did my master's, my PhD, and I've transitioned into more of a translational role and developed, and I'm now the founder of a company. And they are just dynamic and interesting ways if you just are willing to stay open and, transition with the times. And it's exciting. And I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. And I know there are so many opportunities for other people. So it's exciting.
I always say it's a real treat and an amazing time to be alive where we are now. Dr. Tara, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge.